It's been very interesting in the fact that it has grown quite tremendously, but they seem to be holding their own right now. And oh, it's been quite a few years ago. I can't remember exactly. And I do own property on the island, and I just don't want to see all the seascape blocked out. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mrs. Louise King.
That's right. We came out here to visit some friends, and we were to go back to Sarasota because Harold had a contract in Sarasota to do for the Gulf Terrace. Not the Gulf Terrace, excuse me, Sarasota Terrace. And we got out here and we stayed here. And the contract was broken, so we stayed out here on the island, and he entertained from then on.
And I'm going to add to this, the island enjoyed Harold's music extremely. It was terrific.
Yeah. Well, I'm prejudiced, so I don't dare say anything.
Well, he had two in Rudy saying anyhow, we know. A lot more, though.
But I lived here, I stayed here from one winter. We didn't come down because he was inducted in the service, and he was in just a short while, less than a year. Then we came back and we moved here. We lived to stay here, so that was in 1941. And so many of our friends followed us down here, and they were all afraid to go across that wooden rickety bridge. And I remember having some friends, they said, "Oh, you don't go across that bridge, for heaven's sakes." I said, "But look, there's a load of stone going over now. Do you think we're heavier than a load of stone?" But I have many memories of this island. Of course, now I live in town in Bradenton, so I don't, I'm not out here as much. Up until last year, I was living out here, too.
But you were still one of those that made this island.
You bet. It's the best island along the coast. I don't care what they say. It is the best island. And I've had many, many wonderful memories of it. And I've seen it grow, as you might say, from a pup. And really have, because there was no condominiums. There were no, Holmes Beach was no Holmes Beach. It was just a little one road. And we didn't have street lights either along the way. And we walked many, many, many miles around this island. Just wonderful and I think it is still the prettiest beach. It's really. So.
Thank you very much.
Long, Mayor of Holmes Beach. This is a wonderful party and a great tribute to the old-timers of our island. We certainly hope that we're going to be able to maintain some of the new and some of the old charm of our community so that we can continue to enjoy a very leisurely and quiet life on one of the most beautiful places in Florida.
Okay, my name is Ernie Cagnina, and I've been a resident of the city of Anna Maria for the last 34 years. I came to help a friend in the island who was in need of help on a kind of sickness, and I was, and from there on, I've become and purchased the Anna Maria IGA food liner, and I've been on the same corner for the last 34 years. Whoever dreamed of this party, I never realized there were so many people. They've been here so long, and it's a wonderful party. There should be an annual affair as far as I'm concerned. We're all having a grand time.
I'm Connie Hoffman, and I think it's a great party, but there's very few people here that I know in comparison to what I expected to see.
And Mrs. Alec, who had to do with the Ruby Live boat, are here tonight. Is that right? Are they here? And Mrs. Alec. Very much. If there are those who have not registered, will you please register before you go? Our program is now beginning. I am Lena Phelps, and I am the first speaker. I'm always interested to know how people happen to come to the island to live. And looking back over something to talk about tonight, I thought you might like to hear how I happened to come to the island. in 1923 was the time that when I first came out. I was a teacher in the Manatee County Public Schools, and in that day we had no one had ever heard of a salary schedule. And the only way there was to get your salary raised was to somehow, in some way, persuade the powers that be that you should have more money than they were then paying you. We had the Manatee County, as all the counties in Florida, I believe, were divided into districts, school districts. And each district, of course, was taxed a certain amount. And the larger districts had more money. I think the Manatee schools, the Bradenton schools, had the most. Anna Maria had the second largest amount of money coming in for schools. It was the least sought after school in the county because there was no social life here. For even until 1921, there was no bridge at all. They got out here, they just stayed until they could get off on the boat. But for some reason, Anna Maria had always had great charm for me. I lived on the mainland over in the Palmasola area. Well, that year I had been off at the same school I had the year before, teaching one of the grades in the parish school. But I thought this would be a good time for me to investigate the Anna Maria school because I knew they were without a teacher. So I spoke to the powers that be about it and about the salary, and they said, well, the salary will be $65 a month. Well, I thought it over, and I had an ace in the hole that they didn't know about. Clyde Phelps was then courting me, and he was just sat all the time wanting us to come on, let's get married. Don't do this extra year. But you know how girls are. They want to teach one more year so they can have nice clothes and pretty things when they're married. So I conceived the idea. Now we had local trustees, and most of the teachers' negotiations went on with the local trustees. The local trustee, there were three of them, there was always the trustee, was Mitch Davis. Now many of you know Mitch. So Mitch and I were having negotiations back and forth. So I said to him one day, I said, you know, Mr. Davis, I think I'm worth a good deal more than $65 a month. So I want you to tell me, I will come and take the school that isn't very much sought after, for $100 a month. So he thought that was all right, but he went to the superintendent, and the superintendent's reply was, what in the world does Miss Rogers think if that makes her think she's worth that much money? Well, anyhow, I would not come for less than $100 a month, and I think my value was greatly enhanced because of the staying power that I had. So I finally came up with this way of settling it. Ordinarily, the school terms began in September, and they were for 8 months. And they had had a very poor school the year before. The teacher, well, there were a good many things wrong with the school, and they weren't very happy. I said, now, Mitch, you know what I feel very confident that I can teach these children as much in 7 months as they have been having in 8 months, and I think maybe I can give them more. But I will come for 7 months at $100 a month. And you know they bought that? So I came. Well, all the children passed, and I was asked to come back, but by that time Clyde said this is enough, so we were married and went ahead. I didn't come back for many years, but the last time I came, I stayed for 25 years. We are very fortunate tonight to have with us the first male child ever to be the first white male child to have been born on the island. We're not at all sure there were not some Indians way back there in the days, prehistoric days, but Clarence Hall was the first white male child born on the island, and Clarence is going to speak to us now.
We had to get a very poor result.
Can you lift it up a little, Clarence? Can this be lifted up?
I'm interested in Mina's description of her experiences in schools and school work. You may or may not know it, but she is regarded around this area here as one of the real pioneers
of education in this whole area. And it's something to be able to say that, because as she suggested, Barry suggested in her experiences there, she has had to work against all kinds of difficulties, yet you never hear any woes from her. She did ask for a couple of raises of money, and it was given to her naturally. Anybody who runs into Lena and doesn't give what she wants them to give, there's something wrong. My particular interest in this island, really, I haven't got any right to be billed as somebody that ought to get up here and make a speech. The fact that I happened to be the first male boy to be born on the island really isn't anything that I can brag about. I had nothing to do with it. It sort of taught me out here as one of the old pioneers who has been fighting the battles of Anna Maria Key all these years. It's a little bit wrong. But nevertheless, everything has been wonderful down these years. I was just thinking about, and we haven't got time to go into it really, thinking about what it means, what it did mean to pass one's childhood in a place like Anna Maria. Anna Maria is, for my money, the choicest place on earth. And I've traveled a great deal over there. And I couldn't say enough about it, really, to give it the tribute that I feel it ought to have. To be a kid in Anna Maria in those early days, what did it mean? It meant that you had to live your own life pretty well. You had no great wealth. Your family could not provide for you like perhaps they would love to. They lived in a place that was hard to get to. There was constant difficulties of transportation. I remember my father used to go out in his little old sailboat, and that was the rickiest thing I ever saw. But he used to sail all over these waters, back and forth between the cities of this area, selling his vegetables. He had developed a garden down there on the North Point. Most of you know the North Point, do you? That was the area where my grandfather settled. So he took out his homestead. And it was there from there that he was able to not only raise a family, but to start the beautification and the development of Anna Maria Island later on. I'm not going to bore you any further, but I just want to say how much I enjoyed meeting all of you, and I hope we'll meet many, many times again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Clarence. We wish you had a half an hour to talk. Hard to cut it down like that. As I said before, I'm always interested in why people came to the island, how did they know about the island, how did they find it. Grace Alderton is going to tell how she happened to come to the island. Will you come forward, please, Grace?
Yes, she had my kids in school. We lived in Norwood, which is in Cincinnati, Ohio. And in 1947, I had a sick boy. We had a sick boy. The doctor said, is it possible for you to take this boy to Bradenton Beach in Florida? The doctor was here himself one time for a lung ailment, and he healed himself. It healed him. And we couldn't afford it. We had an apartment house. So we rented a first floor apartment, our apartment, and we loaded the Jeep, station wagon, and a four-wheel Jeep, and we came to Florida with two kids, the boy and the girl. And my oldest girl she's in Tampa, she's a public health nurse. And we came to the island and got us a cottage on the beach, down in Bradenton Beach. And the first year I spent on the beach in the salt water and in the salt spray. We'd go to bed at night, our beds would be wet. I thought, mercy, this isn't good for Dale. But it was. Anyway, to make our story short, the kids grew up. He was 7 and Mary Chris was 6. Mary Chris sort of helped. She felt his sickness. She wasn't sick. He was the boy. That the doctor said if we didn't get him down here, he would become tubercular. He had spots that was ready to become active, and he would have to go to a dry climate. When we first came down, people that we met said, "You'll never raise him. You'll never raise him." That first year, I kept him in the salt water and in the salt spray. They went to school with Miss Phelps, and one of their first grade teachers is here tonight too, Miss Shin. And they played in the band in junior high school 3 years. They played in the band 3 years in senior high school. They graduated from high school. Dale spent 4 years and 4 months in the Marine Corps, and today he is in business for himself. Dale, will you stand? And this is the boy. Mary Chris, you can stand too. I want him to see you. This is my daughter. And folks, this is what that salt water and that salt spray can do for you. Thank you.
Thank you. One of my questions, how do people come to know about Florida? We have another very illustrious person in our midst. We have Anna Riles, who was the first white child ever born on Anna Maria Island. Anna Maria's father was one of the pioneer homesteaders, and she's going to tell us some of the interesting things about her days spent on the island. Anna?
Hi, everybody. My parents came from New Jersey to Florida in 1891, and after they had wandered around the state a while, they found Anna Maria. Well, naturally, they just settled here and took up a homestead, and this building that we are now in would be on our homestead if we still had the homestead. They built a two-story house. It was just a little northeast of the bank, the Island Bank. And from our upstairs porch, we could view the bay, the traffic going up and down on the water, and the big ships coming in the Southwest Pass. And Tampa, being the hub of South Florida at the time, was really our shopping town. And my father built a nice little cabin sloop, and we could sail back and forth to Tampa for business and shopping. And we had a horse and wagon, which gave us transportation up and down the island. The people who settled on the island had to provide everything, clear their roads, graded any roads that needed grading, did any dredging themselves to get their boats in to their docks, build their own docks, and all that sort of thing, because there was no public facilities whatsoever. There were schooners sailing up and down the bay, and you could order freight from Tampa and have it come down, but the only telephone in the whole in the whole area here was at Cortez, one telephone that was strung on mostly on pine trees from Bradenton by my Uncle Rurik Cobb and a man named Leffingwell that lived on the island for years. And the post office was at first the post office was right across the bay at John Stone's house on the end of their dock, and then it was moved to Cortez. There were 2 grocery stores later in Cortez along the shore where we could go, and we sailed there. Or my mother rowed it. It was 3 miles down and 3 miles back, but she was good at rowing a boat. And if she wanted to, she always had a big garden and raised string beans and all kinds of things, and we'd help her pick them. And if my father was not at home, she just put the hampers of beans in the rowboat and row out and stop the steamer right out there. And they'd take it aboard and take it to Tampa. Then they'd bring the money back down and put it in the grocery store at Cortez, and that's where Mama would collect it. It was a hard life, but it was a very happy life. The beach was long and beautiful and no drawings on it, a pure white beach and a beautiful gulf. And we had this light, small horse and light wagon. And the bluff was about 3 feet high along here. And we had to cut a road down through the bluff to get the wagon and horse down onto the beach. And then we could go trailing up and down the beach, you know, and pick up shells. And shells came in tons on that beach. After a storm, you could see just banks of the Myostrombus and all kinds of beautiful shells. And we shipped barrels of shells to the Smithsonian Institution. And my mother's uncle spent winters with us, and he was very interested in that and helped with the shell business. And shell business, I say, just the picking up. It wasn't a business, it was a fun thing. One time when we had gone to Tampa, to the county fair, the Hillsborough County Fair, which was a big thing in South Florida, Tampa being the hub of this section of the state, we were coming back from a couple of days up there, and in our sloop, sailing along, the wind was very light, we were moving slowly, and we saw, as we were approaching School Island Bar, now that is Key Royal now, we could see a great flock of birds on the water, just thousands of ducks of several kinds, pelicans, cormorants, and loons and other birds. And these, you could hear a murmur of the birds talking. Ducks talk a lot when they are feeding and resting on the water. And as we approached them, we could hear this murmur constantly until a loon gave out his wild, hysterical cry, and then there was absolute silence for, about a minute. And then the chatter started up again. My father made the remark that the birds were feeding on a school of minnows. Pelicans would rise from the water now and then and dive back into the bay. And he said that they were after the larger fish that also were feeding on minnows. When we came to this flock of birds, very few of them took to the air. They just swam away a little ways and let us go right through. And after we had gone through, we were in water that was not grassy on the bottom of the bay, and we could see the white sand at the bottom. And it was about 8 or 10 feet of water. And we kids wanted to go into the bay and swim, jump overboard. So Papa said, all right, you can go. But my mother put in her word. My older sister and brother, Maisie and Lewis, yes, they could go in, but I was too little. I couldn't go in. Well, Papa settled that then. He said she can swim and she can go in. So we didn't have any bathing suits with us at the time, so we stripped down to our panties and dove overboard. Papa trailed 2 ropes behind us from the stern of the boat so that we could catch hold of those if we wanted to. And it felt wonderful. Oh, that nice water. It wasn't cold yet. That was in the early fall. And no cold air had come yet to cool the bay, and it felt great. Well, a few minutes later, we reached our dock and tied up our boat and was greeted by Captain John R. Jones, another homesteader on the island, a grand neighbor, who had taken care of our horse and chickens while we were gone. I think that's the end of my story.
I think we'll have to do this again sometime when these people, these wonderful pioneers, have a lot longer time to speak. This concludes the first part of our program, and then we will convene again at 9 o'clock and we have 30 minutes more and some other very interesting speakers. Have fun in the intermission, but please come back around 9 o'clock so we can hear the other people speak.
Evidently, Clarence Hall was not the first white boy born on the Saturday.
The program will begin in just a few moments. I have been given a few requests or a few things that people would like to have me mention. But this one, of course, I didn't have to have reminder. I do want to say thank you so very much for all of this whole room full of people, to the Yacht Club and all of their helpers who worked so hard and so long and gave us such a beautiful party. Give them a hand. Frank Perkins from the Bradenton Historical Society, is that right, Bradenton? Yes. Has asked that if any of you have old pictures of the island, he would like so much to have them. They take them at the Historical Society, have prints made of them, and return your original to you in the same condition in which you lent them. I know that's true because we've had a good many there. But they say they don't have enough of the island pictures. Please look among your pictures. Be sure you look at the pictures around on the walls. I'm sure there are many that are interesting. I believe, now though I think the speaker who knows the bays around this area probably better than anyone else does is going to talk to you about our bays, Not Whitaker.
You hear me? I've been told I have a voice like a foghorn anyway.
Raise it just a little.
To the island when he was 12 years old. To Grub Palmettos
Move over this
on
way.
his uncle's farm on School Key, known today as Key Royal. And he came here with his to work for his uncle Samuel Cobb, who was one of the first homesteaders, as you know, on Anna Maria. And my first awareness, I guess you'd call it, of the island was when we lived on a houseboat. It was moored just a little bit to the north of Cobb Marine Ways, and our backyard was the Bay Flats of Tampa Bay, grass flats of Tampa Bay. So we stood off the back porch. It was in the bay. And my brother and I spent all our time in the 8 years that we lived there doing just that, just plowing and poking around the bays. And we dug clams and we gigged flounders.
A little bit closer to the microphone.
And we gathered scallops. And all this time we were sliding our feet and nudging the stingrays out of the way. Now that is no exaggeration, because our grass flats were undisturbed, and there was a small layer of mud that laid over the bottom, and it was perfect ground for the stingrays, and they were all over. They literally took over the bottom of the bay. And anyway, it wasn't long before we had a thriving business going of selling scallops. We get out there on one tide and bring in maybe a quart of scallops apiece, sometimes 3 quarts between us. And these scallops never were put in a refrigerator. We didn't have refrigeration anyway. We would get them and clean them and wash the gook off them and get on our bicycles and take them to Anna Maria to sell. And we did this every day. And we got 50 cents a quart for it, which was a lot of money in those days, especially for a bunch of kids, because we weren't probably any more than 7 or 8 years old. And of course, today there's no scallops out there. This is the sad part. And there's very few flounders out there. You can spend an afternoon and not see a flounder. You might see 2 or 3 stingrays. And in some strange way, this may sound very stupid, and it might sound strange to all of you, that I actually miss that old stingray out there. I do. It was a part of our the mangrove roots, and hung in the branches of the mangrove, and dropped in your boat, and even crawled in your house. Now these were snakes that were harmless, and nobody paid any attention to them. Just like the stingray, you didn't pay any attention to him either. He was always there. And when you'd go out in the bay, you wouldn't have to stop and say, well, today I have to slide my feet. You didn't say that. You just did it. It was as automatic as breathing, something you just always did. And of all the thousands of miles that my brother and I must have traveled in that time, we never stepped on one. It wasn't an accident. We were just always aware. I stepped on one out in the Gulf. I wasn't even thinking about him out there. But anyway, in closing, I'd like to say that the lure of the grass flats is something that I never outgrew. I still like to go out there and stomp around, poke around in the bay. And those years were some of the best years of my life. Was right out there in my backyard of Tampa Bay.
Thank you. Don't we all wish we could go back? Wonderful times. All I'm going to do about this next one is to announce the topic because it is a very intriguing topic. Connie Hoffman will talk about the silver dollar bar. Connie Hoffman.
Let's tell you what the silver dollar bar used to be. It was Todd's. Mr. and Mrs. Todd and their son Art that went to school with me owned it. It was a family gathering place for everybody. Our parents and the children came there. Mr. and Mrs. Todd played a fantastic game of bridge. That's where I learned to play bridge. The older people taught us how to dance. That's where I learned to dance. And I'd also like to tell you about the Moose Club. The Moose Club used to be the Braden Beach Baths. Mr. and Mrs. Tichenor came down from New Jersey and built it during the Depression, and it was the most luxurious restaurant in Manatee County and also the most expensive. And there weren't too many people that could afford to eat there, so they had a real hard time. When I graduated from high school, my parents couldn't afford to send me to college, so I went to work as a waitress at the Braden Beach Baths, which later became the Gulf Terrace. And I'd never waited tables before, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I did a very bad job. And one day, a very unpleasant man and a very lovely lady who was his wife came in for lunch. And I took their order, and when I had finished taking their order, I asked them if they wanted coffee, and his wife said later, and I assumed she was speaking for both of them. And when I served their lunch, I didn't bring any coffee, and the gentleman was absolutely furious, and he demanded his coffee immediately. I went in the kitchen, and it wasn't through dripping, and I had to wait. And when I came out, he was so angry, he was already on his way into the kitchen to get it, and he grabbed it out of my hand and spilled it all over me. And I did the typical teenage thing. I burst into tears and ran into the kitchen. And I assumed I was going to be fired immediately. The next thing I knew, Mr. Tichenor, who needed every customer he could get, came in and kissed me, wiped my tears, bandaged my hand, told me that this man was waiting to apologize, but I did not have to accept his apology. And I said I'd be glad to. And I went out, and he was no longer irate. What Mr. Tichenor told him, I don't know. But he was very cowed, and he apologized profusely, and I accepted his apology. And he said, Mr. T said, Connie's accepted your apology because she's a lady. You are not a gentleman, or you wouldn't have done what you did, and I don't ever want to see you in here again. And that's the kind of people that I grew up with on this island when it was a a very small place, and everybody knew everybody else, and everybody took care of everybody else. Thank you.
Hear about the early days on the island, the more I think we'd all like to go back and live some of them too. Wyatt Blasingame is a nationally known writer, the author of more than 600 stories and articles, 4 adult novels, and more than 40 books for young readers. Wyatt Blasingame will be our next speaker.
Ask me how I got here, but I'll tell you anyway. I've always thought that this island had some kind of magnetic attraction for nuts. It does. The one thing that, you know, anybody who gets here knows very quickly whether they're going to like this place or not. It doesn't take long. And those who like it have, I think, one thing in common. They're all a little odd. Years ago, I wrote a short story in which I said that if you unscrewed a screwball anywhere in the United States, blindfolded him, revolved him twice, and turned him loose, he'd wind up on Anna Maria. Well, I'd lived here 10 years by then. Everybody knew I wrote for a living. Nobody ever read anything I wrote. That story hadn't been on the stands 3 days before everybody on the island had read it and sent copies to their friends up north, bragging about who they were. There was only one gentleman here who objected, and he went to a relative of Dottie Raymond. I'm going to skip all names. And said, don't you object to being called nutty? And she said, hell no, I'm as crazy as anybody else on this island. And we did have some choice characters here. Again, I'm going to skip names, but we had a couple here that, you know, we all assumed they were living here when I got here. 2 or 3 years ago by, we figured they were married until suddenly they announced, you know, that they'd gone to town and got married. Well, that was all right, too. So 4 or 5 months go by, and he moves across the road and builds himself a little shack on the beach, which shows that's a long time ago. You just don't move in and build shacks on the beach anymore. But he lived over there about 6 months, and they got divorced and moved back together. But it was a rather tempestuous relationship all the way along. I remember up at the old pavilion, which is now the Sandball, the pavilion brewing. But anyway, we had a ping pong game that went on there like poker in the Navy, you know, just went on for years. Just everybody played. Whoever, Dottie's brother played most because he beat everybody, and the winner kept playing. But the game just went on. So one night we were all playing in there, and the door on the roadside banged open, and this character came tearing across the old, not the beach door. Well, so we went back to playing ping pong. A few minutes later, here came his wife. I don't know whether she's married at that time or not, but with a butcher knife, boom, out the other door. We never did see him again that night, but we saw him later, and so, obviously she didn't catch him. But she was the same lady, Lena mentioned, I think there was one telephone on the island at one. There were 3 telephones on the island at this time. There was one down in Braden Beach, and Alec Carlton had one, and there was one up at the old pavilion. Well, this lady came in, and we had punch boards legal at that time, and she looked down, paid $10, $5, $3. She said, pay all this? Pete Vigneault ran. She said, yeah, I pays that. But she said, I'm going to punch it out. Don't believe it. I'm going to punch it out. I'm going to win all this money. He said, now look, if you punch it all out, you're going to lose money. She wouldn't believe it. She punched it all out and she lost money. So she goes over to the telephone, waving this up and calls the sheriff, probably Roy Baden. Holding up, waving the punch board in front of the telephone as evidence. He didn't come out. But she went out and bared the punch board under the palm tree as evidence. I don't know whether Roy ever got here or not. But we had a lot of good people. on Dottie there, talking about scallops. She and her brother Steve took me out here in the bay. And I caught my share of scallops. But we're sitting there and Steve is opening scallops. He's got a quart open. Dottie's got almost a quart. I got about that much in the bottom of a half a pint. Both thumbs cut off, bleeding. It's changed.
Maybe I should say, aren't we glad that some of the nuts stayed? Our last speaker, Clyde Phelps, is the island authority on plants and animals. I tell him that every time he opens the door, there's somebody waiting on the other side to pick his brains, and he's always generous with them. But he loves every animal and every plant. But sometimes he has very odd experiences with animals. He's going to tell you one of these now.
About talking into one of these things, can you all hear me pretty well? Talk reminded me of talking about the stingarees and the flounders. I had a friend that used to claim he could step on a flounder, and hold him and then pick him up. Well, that worked pretty well until one day he stepped on a stingray, and after that he couldn't pick up the flounder so well. Well, this story about, I'm going to tell you a little experience I had about a gator, and it's kind of a long story, and I expect some of you have heard it twice already, so if you want to leave and look at television or something, it's all right with me. But anyhow, it was in the summer of 1929, we had bought a little house on Pine Avenue, which is now Adams Nursery there, in 1925, but this was 1925. In the summer we had come out to stay a while. And across the road from the cottage there was quite a large pond. Some people call it a lake, but anyhow, there were a lot of big buttonwoods and mangroves growing around it, and in these trees there were a lot of bird nests, mainly the green heron. I think we had counted about 26 green heron nests in it that summer. So there was a trail leading around through the very thick brush around the lake, and we would make periodic surveys in this trail to see how many nests there were and how the nests were coming along and so on. So this one day I started out this trail, and I just gone a little ways, and here was quite a large alligator lying across the trail. Well, of course, I'm a Florida cracker, and I was used to alligators, and I thought nothing of it, really. But I had a little stick in my hand. This one didn't seem to move. They generally move off if they saw you coming, but anyhow, I went up, got up pretty close, and we stretched right across the trail, and I hit at him with this little stick, broke the stick, and instead of moving off, while this gator kind of stood up on his hind legs and opened his mouth and blew at me, like the big gators do, when they're mad. And, well, I thought that was a little odd, but I wasn't going to let a little old gator buck me. So I got me a little bigger stick, and I hit at him again. Well, this time, he not only opened his mouth, but he started after me. Well, I took off headed to one of these big buttonwood trees as fast as I could, and the gator right after him. Well, first thing I knew, I was up the tree, and the gator came out right under me, and her momentum took it off into the water, and I thought, well, that's the end of it. She would swim away in the water. But instead of swimming away, this gator turned around and came right back and sat down under the tree where I was. Every time I'd try to come down the tree, the gator would try to come up the tree. So that wasn't doing so good. I climbed up in the top of the tree, quite a large tree, and from the top I could see all around, and I saw some people coming along the road, and I called to them and asked them if they would step over to that little white house over there and tell the lady to come out where I could talk to her. Well, I knew that I had the gator's attention, and it wouldn't bother her problem. Well, anyhow, pretty soon here she comes all excited, I said, well, keep calm. I said, this old gator's got me up the tree here, but I'm all right. I want you to go down and get Bill Davis. Not Bill, but Mitch Davis it was, Mitch then, you know, was our mayor, and I think he was also the chief of police and the deputy sheriff. Anyhow, he was an important man in the community. And I knew he'd have a gun. Well, she went down, but Mitch wasn't home, but his grown son Bill was there. So Bill came down. He got a hold of a .45 revolver somewhere. So here I was sitting up the tree. I thought, well, this gator will take off and leave me sitting here looking foolish. But it didn't. It stayed there until Bill came. He came and shot it. I don't know. We thought he'd killed it, but we started to drag it out by the tail. You know, I looked and the gator was hanging on with his front feet. So I said, look here, Bill, you better shoot this thing again. So he shot it again, and that was the end of it. We'd have killed it that time. Yeah, then I could come down the tree, which I was very glad to do. And we dragged the gator out and skinned it. Well, you might wonder why this gator was so aggressive. And so a day or two later, we went exploring around there and found that it had a nest there. So I guess the poor old gal was just trying to defend her nest. I wouldn't have bothered her if she hadn't bothered me, but we couldn't get along. So that's my alligator story. Thank you.
It was a lot of fun, but it wasn't a bit of fun for me. I know when I started, I had to go across the little footbridge there, and when these people said, that man out there hollering for help, and I think he needs help. Well, I thought if I go out here, and if I start across this bridge, and I could just have a picture of him there with his legs all bleeding, but he called and told me the alligator had him up the tree. But I had to go across the little bridge anyway, and I didn't sink and fall in the water like I was afraid I would. But it really was quite an experience. Now that concludes our program, and I think we have a little bit of time. If there is anyone in the audience who would like to speak shortly, if you'll raise your hand and come to the microphone, please.
One of the nicest community funds that we started in 1960, and we rate every trailer $4 a year for this, and we take care of all the Heart Fund, the Cancer Fund, and the different funds. We have 5 of them. So we send money to all those companies. And I think that the trailer park is a wonderful place, and we've been there ever since for 100 years. The golf cart, and now it's the Sandpiper Mobile Boat. And I think the people on the island think that they're just fast to live there.
Before we are through, and that is Billy Martini and her mother, Daisy Odell, and we are still in the Spark Club. If it hadn't been for Billy and her mother, we never would have had this. Will you please stand and give them a great big hand? Please sit down and enjoy your evening. Please. On the back of your little slip that you have for your table sitting, you'll find a little blank spot there. I'd like very much for you to write down any comments, criticisms, suggestions, anything. Thank you, Carolyn. And Senator, right up here on the table, because the next question I'm going to ask you is, would you like to have this an annual affair? Those on the negative, please respond. Majority takes it, I guess. And before I forget it, this is the most, I'm going to get loud and clear here. This is the most important thing. I've been introduced, my mother has, but this thing would not have gone if it hadn't been for the Island Kiwanis, Dr. Ray Green, Mr. Stoll, Mr. Flanagan, Mr. Sell,
Thank you, because my mind is not going right now. I've had names going right this way all night long. Andy Rasmussen, Peggy Holmes Claudier, from my missus, Carolyn Norwood. What would we have done without her and the Islanders? Thank you. But a lot of people have done this. I know I've got to sit down, but yes. But what made the dinner was you all coming, and thank you again.
The manager of this building, of this restaurant, would like to say a word to you now.
I'll take just a half a second.
He's not going to ask you.
We don't want you to rush out of here. We're going to get our band player back up here. Our organist back up here. And he's going to play extra time tonight. So if you like, just sit back, relax, enjoy, and dance as long as you want. And thank you for coming. I want to thank you, Tony, and myself. We're great people, and it's a pleasure serving you.
That is all I have been asked to say. So from now on, you are on your own.
Yes, I knew I was going to do it. I think we owe a great deal of gratitude to Lena Phelps for the job she has done here tonight. That's something none of us would have taken on. Please stand with her a standing ovation.